Hello everyone, this is Viking with a W, your European Pokemon investor, coming to you with a new episode in a series that I would like to call like the artist segment. Today I would like to discuss a potential investment opportunity or even at least like a comparison when it comes to potential investments on artists' cards that are modern and currently sought after. And I think we can start with the most obvious one, which is Shinji Kanda, like the modern era cards that most people know of are currently being chased that are coming from Shinji Kanda itself. So in order to appreciate like every artist, I would like to do some price comparisons also when it comes to the European market, when it comes to like raw or even like slapped cards and graded cards from across different grading companies. This might be a little bit of an interesting segment because I'm doing this for the first time and also it's a little bit of a research on my end. So probably at the end of this video there will be some interesting outcomes to say the least. But without further ado, let's move on to the segment that will have like three parts, like an introductory segment. Then it will be like the price comparison for each card that is currently being chased in each language. And lastly, do a price comparison with price charts for each card, and probably we'll see some key factors that might determine if a card is investable and in which grade and whatnot. But let's dive into it. So it is a little bit of a freestyle, so we'll see how things will go. So overall, if you have a look at it, like Shinji Kanda has been around for quite some time now, and probably many of you already have had the chance to even probably own one of his cards, or if you are not aware of who Shinji Kanda is, he's a modern upcoming, not upcoming, he's already like an established artist when it comes to like Pokemon investments, and the most notable ones that most people are chasing are the uh, Giratina V card that you might know from Lost Origin or the Japanese equivalent. Later on, there was this Galarian Moltres, which is not that popular, but still Shinji Kanda art. Currently, like the second most sought after card is the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved. And then there are also other notable mentions like the Roaring Moon EX, Seismitoad, Magneton, and currently the last entry like the Oricorio EX, which is part of the UPC for, was it, what was it, the Phantasmal Flames, if I recall. So it's a promo card. So I took the liberty of putting all of these cards into an Excel sheet, and I tried to figure out like what are the cost bases in terms of the raw equivalents of all these cards, as you can see in these columns. Then I compared like what is currently available on the card market website when it comes to specific graded card slabs like CGC, ACE, and stuff like that, but that's just the English equivalent. ACE grading is, I think, Randolph Pokemon's grading company. That's in the UK. Then Japanese grading. I know that Japanese like have their own grading company that they really like domestically, but for us it doesn't make a sense to mention it, so I mentioned it as PSA 10 variants. And for the local patriots in Germany, France, and Italy, I looked at the AOG grading, PCA grading, which is French and Italian grad grading. I apologize for any Portuguese or Spanish people that might be watching this video. I will add that in another segment. I realized that when I did this, that I already could have done my due diligence and add also these other languages. But as a basis for this video, I think this might be a good potential starting block. So let's have a look at it from top to bottom. So starting off with Oricorio. When it comes to the raw value, there's a story to be told. Like English is naturally like the go-to, but for Japanese really like their art, and there's a little bit of a premium when it comes to raw values in terms of like a good artist and a good card in some of the cases. So it isn't very surprising to me that this Oricorio has a little bit of a premium on it. But that might not be the case for all cards, right? So if we look at other cards, like between the Magneton, there's not this premium. When we come to Seismito, there's also not this premium. But overall, if you look at the value of 45 euros, it doesn't mean that there isn't a premium. For Japanese, the art is very important, as I mentioned, and this amount of money for one card is kind of huge in that sense. Then there's like the Roaring Moon equivalent, which is a fairly sizable gap. I don't know if this card isn't popular or anything. The Magikarp has is not that big of a gap, but still it's a sizable amount. Galarian Moltres, very similar in this sense, and the Giratina V not even available in the European market, and in English it's I think the most chased after card. So the price is somewhat in ascending order when it comes to raw cards. Now, if we look at the German, French, and Italian equivalents, for Oricorio EX, we can see that the German and Italian raw cards are the cheapest, and the French one is, I don't know why, but it's the second most pricey, most expensive one in terms of raw. Overall, now if we look at it this way, you would feel like what, or at least you could question like what would be the best investment in this case, right? I think we should stick just to the basics. Naturally, you pivot to the English raw version, secondly, like the Japanese one, and then whatever is your fancy in terms of like investing in this raw card. I probably might need to add also like the supply on the card market page of all these cards just to make a comparison of what it is actually that's being there selected there. But nevertheless, you can see that right now there's a little bit of a chase going on also for Oricorio if this price is increasing in Japanese version. So the English slabbed equivalents, which is PSA 10, CGC, ACE grading, and PSA 9, does it make sense to invest in some of these? I think the golden rule when everyone's talking about PSA is that PSA 10s hold like a premium if you're not holding Beckett. And then afterwards, the third best option is like CGC. And I will have a separate video about like potential grading companies in Europe, like what is the cost basis and stuff like a comparison, what makes sense to um, use if you are into grading. Then we have like Ace Grading Randolph's company, which is kind of getting the same value almost in various cases when it comes to grading companies and the 10 equivalents of any card. So it might be a potential contender. I'm not sure if people actually like really collect ace graded cards, but at least from a price standpoint, it seems like there are these variants. But as you can see, not every card is even graded in ace 10 on the European market. So you have a bigger chance of getting like a um, less costly entry for your graded cards in CGC because people tend to grade CGC more than Ace grading since Ace is like somewhat of an exclusive company in the UK mostly. But I digress. So these are the values. Now for Japanese, and if we compare it similar to how we compared it to the raw equivalents, right now it seems like there is a little bit of a difference for Oricorio that PSA 10 holds a bigger value as PSA 9, which is normal, but when it comes to like the raw amount, if you take in the shipping cost and grading cost, PSA 9 doesn't make much of a sense to like even hold. Then again, PSA 10 is at least cheap in the Japanese version, but the English version holds that premium. Now, for between CGC and the Japanese PSA 10, They are somewhat similar, so it begs the question, what is better to invest in this case? So the obvious choice from a price perspective would be the English raw if you are integrating. Like you could buy more raw cards of this equivalent, but then again, the quality assurance is not there when we compare it to the Japanese quality assurance. So you might be guaranteed to buy a good raw Oricorio for 32 euros and grade it as a PSA 10 or CGC 10, and it might be more secure for you to get this kind of price point and that this kind of price for your potential order that you would want to sell. But we'll see how these numbers reflect on other cars as we move down the line. So the local patriots for Germany, French, and Italian, if you have a look at it, German AOG holds even less of a premium. French PACA holds even less of a premium, and and the Italian grad company actually gets somewhat of a premium, similar to CGC and the Japanese equivalent. But it might be just this one potential card, we'll see. Magneton. Magneton English Raw, 11 euros. Overall, similar price for Japanese and German, 7 to 8 euros. Now, an increase is for the French and Italian cards. I'm not sure if this is a supply thing, but having a much more expensive raw Magneton doesn't make kind of sense. And this Magneton, just to give you like a full disclaimer, this one is not the stamped Pokemon version, Pokemon Center version. This is a normal Magneton without the stamp. Okay, so the price points are set, how it looks like when it comes to graded slabs. So overall, PSA 10, biggest premium, CGC way lower. Ace doesn't even have an equivalent on the market, and PSA 9 doesn't even make sense to grade and buy. So there's a huge risk when you are grading the Magnetons, right? Even though it's a good cost basis to buy your raw card, in terms of the grading, it might not make sense because you're taking a huge risk where there's like a 120 euro difference between a 9 and a 10. In terms of the Japanese, well, similar story for the PSA 9, you're taking a huge risk. And for the PSA 10, there's not much of a premium going on there. So if you were to probably invest, it might be a good investment to buy out PSA 10 Japanese versions since there's this little bit of a cost basis going on there. And for the Oricorio, if you were to invest it and from purely from a price perspective, it probably makes sense also to buy the PSA 10 version just because it's the lowest amount on the list and it can give you like a good entry. So overall, the Japanese equivalents are good in this case. If there were buying opportunities for other countries like Germany and France and Italy, there has to be enough demand for the price to increase. Now, if you look at the trend that we established kinda with the Oricorio, the Magneton also holds a premium for the Grad 10, right? In comparison, it's similar to the PSA 10, which is interesting. Okay, moving on to Seismitoad. The pricings are fairly equivalent across the board when it comes to all other languages except Japanese. So Japanese has a 45 euro entry. And when it comes to grading, Seismitoad has a ceiling of a PSA 10 in 1,300 euros. A CGC on the European market holds 550 euros, which is a huge difference for an English card. So if you were to grade it, it's better to go with PSA just because of the premium. For ace grading, similar story to CGC. And PSA 9s are risky, but still, if you miss out on a PSA 10, you can still get at least some kind of profit from a PSA 9. Japanese equivalents, there's quite a lot of premium for grading it as a PSA 10. PSA 9, you I think get at least back what you invested in it. If you compare it to AOG, this one is the least favorite except for the Japanese one. The French equivalent isn't on the card market as I was researching, but an Italian version of a PSA 10 goes for 300 euros. So the clear winner in three cases between like Germany, France, and Italy is Italy. So Italy is kind of the heavyweight leader on the board of graded cards right now, at least for Shinji Kanda. Roaring Moon, if we have a look at the prices, 154 for English raw. Japanese is a very low price of 24. Germany 110, French 125, 100, and Italian. Now let's take a step back and look at the raw pricings and compare it to like the English version. So in some cases, some of the cards in different languages are more expensive than the English version. So in two cases, it's France, and like three cases, and the third case is Italian. When it comes to Roaring Moon, the trend isn't there. When we look at the Magikarp, France again is leading the board. I'm not sure if there's like a huge demand for this card or whatever it is that's driving this price upwards. But at least from a card market perspective, it seems like there is something for France going on in three different cases, which is interesting that you can deduct somewhat of a trend for the French cards and the Italian graded cards. It stands to reason that French love raw more and Italians like graded more. So if they have a good price point, I would assume they like to grade it with Grad or whichever company. That makes sense because the value is coming somewhat through in terms of the graded variant. Coming back to the Roaring Moon, I wasn't even able to find an English PSA 10 on card market. There's a CGC Pristine version for 750 bucks. Ace grading was not even available. PSA 9 goes to 240. So in terms of like an investment, not a good price point to go into if you think about like you want to buy as many raw cards as possible so that when they increase in value then you can get back a lot of value when you create those cards later on. That would be my strategy at least. So I wouldn't recommend grading this, but if you like to risk that amount of money for one card and thinking it's a potential PSA 10 or whichever 10, then go for it. But at this stage of the market, since the card has already like been there for quite a while, there's a really small chance that the seller actually holds like a PSA 10 quality card. So not recommended. Even like the Seismitoad currently, it's almost like still a new card and still new packs are being ripped because Black Bolt is currently on the market for a short time. Probably like still a good entry point just because of the risk reward ratio, like 1,300 euros. Like, come on, I'd probably risk it at some point. But I'm more of a conservative investor and also like a collector or what have you. I'd rather go with the Japanese version. I know there's a smaller premium, but it's less risky and there's like a bigger opportunity to get a PSA 10 or CGC 10 or whichever equivalent of a 10 just because of the quality assurance. Okay, Roaring Moon back to the Japanese versions. For whatever reason, Roaring Moon has is 93 euros in PSA 10. PSA 9 it's 38, so it's quite a risk if you get like a 9 just because of the cost basis, and not that big of a profit margin on the Japanese if you go with the PSA 10. A AOG 9.5 goes for 250 in German. So when we compare this, there might be an opportunity to get quite some money out of it if you grade with AOG, probably. But probably if you grade it with PSA, you cannot go wrong as well, even if we have a German equivalent graded with PSA. For French PCA, I only found a 9.5, which comes at around 250 euros, and grad doesn't even have this listed as a grad 10. Now, before I go to the Magikarp, I'd rather go to the Galarian Moltres just because of the cost basis, and if you will look at the raw prices, they are somewhat the same, and also overall, when it comes to like the graded equivalents, that there's not much money to be made-ish. With the Japanese or German versions, and French and Italian don't even have the equivalents, like not many people are grading them. But if you consider to go with this card, since it's already out for quite some time, and you think that, wow, 9 euros, it's a good cost basis, I can buy a lot of these cards still and get like 150 euros out of a PSA 10, CGC 10, or like PSA 10 goes for 350 bucks. Might be a good start to take a risk, at least. When it comes to the Japanese equivalent, also like a potential good value to be made if there's a good quality card out there. But then again, the downside of a PSA 9 is that you could only break even, if so, if at all, after fees and everything. And yeah, back to the Magikarp. So, interesting story. French equivalent raw is much more expensive than the English version. The Japanese, in this case, is catching up to the English equivalent. German equivalent is much more expensive as well. And the IT equivalent or the variant is really cheap in this case. Does it hold any value? It's too hard to tell because the English version of a PSA 10 comes at around 4,000 euros. The PSA 9 comes at 400. At this point, I think the strategy somehow shifts if you are on a budget. I personally wouldn't grade this card, but what I would do is buy a PSA 9 in English. It just makes sense to me, even at this price point. We will look at the price chart, and in terms of like the amount of time that it was on the market and what is the price now, how it moved, at least I will show it to you on the price chart. It makes sense so that it is being bought. That's at least my strategy. So for Japanese, it kind of makes sense, but also it doesn't, to try to get a PSA 9 because PSA 10s because PSA 9s are not even there on the market, and whatever cost that you would add to your PSA 9, you could at least get back what you invested in, I would presume. But then again, people look at the price chart, market prices, so you would have to be very cautious of what the current price of a PSA 9 is, and if you would want to invest in the Magikarp, because the Magikarp is, I think, already out of print, right, at this point. So the German equivalent of a PSA 10 comes at around 1,800. So if we look at the raw price, it's 200, but the quality assurance, we don't know what the German equivalents are in terms of quality. French PCA 10 not even present, and the grad equivalent of a 9.5 comes at around 250 euros, which at a starting point of 90 euros might be a potential try in terms of like buying and grading, but in terms of investment, not that much. I wouldn't risk it at least. And lastly, Giratina V, which at raw comes at 650 euros. Japanese not even like present in terms of raw, everything's only graded on the card market. German 415, French 790. Again, like the raw investment potential in French is in the raw cards. IT Italian at 600, so somewhat similar. So to close off the raw segment is that you either go with a good cost basis early on with English cards and buy raw and try to grade them and hold them long term, or you do the same with Japanese, I would assume, or you could go with investing in French raw cards because they tend to go at a premium at a certain point, in many cases, at least for these art variants of cards from Shinji Kanda. Giratina goes at around 3,250 and a PSA 10, and there's a huge difference when it comes to CGC 10. Now, I don't know what would be the price equivalent in the pristine version, but I would assume it's somewhere near the PSA 10. Ace Grading didn't have a listing, it only had a 9.5, but still it fetched a 2,000 euro price tag. PSA 9 is 850, so even if you miss, you still get some money back from what you invested in the raw card. But since the raw cards are not even like existent at this point, it doesn't make sense to buy it. You, from an investment standpoint, I wouldn't even invest in it. I know it's a very sought after card and people really like it. And in terms of potential for future, it might increase and it's already like established as well. But I'm not an advocate for that. We are on a budget, so we're thinking like where can we do the most damage with our small budget, right? In terms of the PSA 10 Japanese equivalent, there's also a nice price tag here. PSA 9 is non-existent on car market. AOG 1,300 and PCA only has a PSA 9 and the French equivalent which goes for around 1,200 and Italian equivalent goes for 5,000, but that's not a, at least this value was the only value present, so someone is expecting that this card will reach that price point and someone will buy it at 5,000. So don't take this with or take this one with a grain of salt. This is not like a really representative value. So yeah, overall, if we look at the bigger picture of these prices, you can go back and forth and try to analyze this, what I've gathered. Now, if we move to the price chart of all these cards, if we look at Oricorio, does it make sense to buy and grade and hold and whatnot? So in English, if we look at the raw pricings, I'm going to try to have it on my screen somehow. So raw Oricorio goes for 16 euros. Here you can see it's 12. The PSA 10 version is 140. Here in Europe it's 160. I think this is also due to like import costs and something. So at this point it makes sense for you to buy raw, or since there's like this flattening effect going on and the card is already out for what is the month? December, May. Already it's out for 6 months, so it's even a good potential buy as a PSA 10 as an investment card at this point. The Japanese equivalent, when we look at it, similar story. The flattening already happened, so the price is already increasing in value. Might not be a good time to buy it as a PSA 10, but rather buy it raw and try to grade it so that you can sell it at this price point. Magneton, the English version, non-stamped, $8 and PSA 10 120. If we look at it, yep, it's 11 euros, somewhat similar, and 150, so import cost. So the same story. Even though this card is for way longer there, you can see like the flattening happened at a certain stage, but now, after the first leg up, it's still flat, but it's still moving somewhat. So people are interested in this card, and I would assume that once the raw versions dry up, then the supply of the raw cards dries up, then the PSA 10 will increase. So there's a potential speculation play there. When it comes to the Japanese, since it doesn't have like a stamp promo or whatever, it still makes sense also because the potential investment potential there is quite huge, I would say. Raw, it goes at a very nice price, even though it's out for a very long time. So The Japanese version is 7 euros in Europe, and in terms of like a PSA 10, it will increase similarly to the English equivalent. That is at least my forecast. Since the card is almost out for 3 years, I would assume that the 3-year benchmark kind of reminds people that, okay, this card is out for 3 years. People might start to buy it out just because it will go out of print. Galarian Moltres, this card is already out for way longer. And for a potential like PSA 10, this might be also a good play at this point. Like the card's value when it was back at $2, wow. As you can see, it increased to 15 bucks over the span of 3 years, which is more than 5 times. So even in raw, if buyouts start to happen again, then this might increase. So PSA 10 version of the Japanese card. Well, this one has been out for a very long time. It's at its all-time high, but if you look at like the prices on the chart, it increased steadily in terms of raw. So the supply in raw is dwindling and might follow a similar scenario. But if you were a person to come in early, does it make sense for you to hold it for 3, 4 years and longer to reach this kind of price tag? I don't think so. So similar story with the Magneton, but this one at least has quite more attractive curve to it from a shorter time span perspective. But this one has been the longest out, so or this one was the Japanese version, so I would invest in the Japanese version, I think. Magikarp overall, like, I like this chart the most just because, and I will show you also the PSA 10, the PSA 9 equivalent. So 50 raw, 75, 9 and 10, 337 after like half a year or something. And since it's like 3 years now, the increase in raw PSA 9 and also PSA 10s are substantial. So even if you're on a budget and you bought like PSA 9s of this card, like congratulations, I would say this you made a ton of money and not that big of a time span. In the Japanese equivalent, if we look at it, so the basis is somewhere around 22, 49, 57 PSA 10. Like if you bought it at PSA 10 version, you've made quite a lot of money. PSA 9, somewhat similar story, like 4x your money. This card overall has value and it still will increase. So probably a good play there. Seismitoad is out in English for quite a while now, so it's from August already, so it probably will be coming to 1 year mark. So the flattening has been there and people start to pick it up. So this is like the natural time where cards start to pick up in value. And even when it was flat, it had like a substantial value, even ungraded, and also like the PSA 10 version. PSA 9 is somewhat similar to Ross, doesn't make sense. But as a potential play, the reward is huge there. As the Japanese equivalent, if we look at it, like there's not much to talk about. It's still flat. So even if it's there for quite a while now, from July, so it's 2 months away from reaching that 1 year mark, potentially it might spike. After that 1 year, you can expect some kind of spike. So if you feel lucky, or if you want to invest in cards like this, probably a good play to invest in PSA 10 slabs of the Japanese version. Roaring Moon, there's quite a premium for that, but as I said, it's already out for quite a long time now. Not that many cards might be there in terms of like the quality. The Japanese version, not that big of a premium. Probably would be a good play to buy PSA 10 slabs, but this is not a sought after card, like not even in the top 30 most sought after Pokemon. The Giratina V overall, like it's nice to look at these numbers, like how it increased, but overall in terms of investment, if you don't have a huge bankroll, well, you're out of luck. You can only look at it. Even if you would want to buy it in a Japanese version just because it's cheaper and you want to have it in your collection, you're also out of luck. So that boat has sailed, unfortunately. But at least in terms of the comparisons for Shinji Kanda art, you can see like the overall trend between each of these cars that are currently on the market that are being chased, that what can you expect in from a long-term perspective. Now try to go backwards and look at these charts, look at the pricings, and look at the equivalents in all your local languages that you would want to like be a patriot for. If it's French, raw, or Italian, graded, then probably there are some plays to be made for this type of card. So yeah, overall a longer video. I hope you got something out of this and that it brought you some value. So if you like these types of videos, let me know in the comment section. If you feel like this, if I should continue with this kind of segment, which I would really like, I would still do at least these 5 artists in due time. Then leave a like, comment, subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Everyone who's watching, thank you for sticking until the very end. So this was Poke Viking with a W, and I will get you next time.